Awesome. Okay, so we're ready to do some more poetry. I'm so excited to hear from these two readers. So for the Zoomers in the audience, we had a slight miscommunication with Herb, so we actually don't have Herb Bryce as our opener tonight, but that is okay. Well, hopefully we can fit him back in later in the season. But instead, you have a treat because you get to hear Daniel Scott, who is an amazing poet. He's actually going to be a featured reader in, I think, November. From a really interesting new book that he's got. But today he's going to read from a previous book, and he's just in the moment hopping in to be our poetic opener. I don't have a bio written down for Daniel, but I'm sure I could say a few things about him. Daniel is a wonderful poet. He has numerous books of poetry out. He's also the AD Emeritus of PEP, preceding me as the artistic director here, and is a wonderful mentor and friend. So welcome, Daniel. That's that mic. I guess you got that.
Good. Can you hear me? Yep. So this is unexpected, and what I'm going to do is it's always going to give me a signal when there's 2 minutes, and I'm going to try and read poems that I haven't necessarily read before. This book, Aftertime, I wrote around my retirement, so it is a bit about, part of it's about time, it came out just around the beginning of COVID, so it hasn't had a lot of public air. So what the heck? So I'm going to start with a poem called Reverberations. Life passes in diverse tempos, a symphony of movements. An accordion landscape folds, unfolds, beats undulate as time signatures shift in the bellows pleats. Klezmer music heats late night coffee, lights dim, laughter. In a garden, chairs, French doors open. Inside, a piano dances a Chopin etude, the scent of roses, honeysuckle. Bursts of tango steam the horizon. Dancers in foreplay move together. Choral voices carry me aloft. A Bible open on a desk, pages spotted with candle wax. Gregorian chant trembles a stone vault, shadows still. Over a field, a bugler plays taps, row on row, steles and crosses. A slow dirge moans over a gray sea. Tears climb the sand shore, break, tumble away. A soprano leaps an octave, carries me over decades. Soundscapes rise, fold, fall, unfold. And this is one of the time poems in the book, which I wrote around the beginning of my retirement. And it's called Too Much Time times 3. 1. I shake at the thought there will be too much time. Days will need to be remade. As if a day was a bed with sheets to be tidied in the morning, or a jacket that could be tailored to fit better. 2. I celebrate the possibility there will be too much time. I will indulge in empty spaces and savor options, wallow in the mud, a pig cooling itself on a hot summer day. 3. In the morning dark, I worry there will be too much time. I may be lost, days collapsing around me. I'm drawn to the darkness. Sorry, but so I write quite a number of dark poems. Yay! I gotta get cheer over in the corner there. This is called Needles. The first time he soloed on his bike, he rode into a blue spruce, scratched limbs, looked back to see if he was watched. always the wonder if he was seen, believes he never was or known, like glass to be looked through. Needle tracks on his arms help him forget what he cannot remember.
You got about 4 minutes now.
Okay. In descent. There are days meant for descent, but as I go down, there is an ocean in the basement. It laps against the furnace, pushes in and out of the storage room, tidal. Flotsam of memory bumps against the tool rack and wall. Outside is dry, but the bottom of my life is flooded. Purple kelp clings to the floor posts. The rich scent of salt drifts up the stairs. It will not drain away. Tastes like tears. There is an undertow. I hear the suck in my dreams. 2 minutes? Yeah.
You're at 5 minutes now.
5?
You got 3 minutes left.
3, okay. The problem is when you don't rehearse, it's a challenge.
You're doing great.
This is a poem after Linda Gregg, a small poem. It's called When Spring Comes Too Late. A parka drapes the wooden bench beside the broken door. Cold white air, cold white light. The cabin has gaps between rough-cut logs. A tilted table wears a sheen of frost. Wind drones in the cold stovepipe. Outside, one sled dog chained to a naked willow. The remains of a bone frozen beneath paws. A whimper echoes along the single track, disappearing into the bush. And since this is about retirement, I'll finish with a poem called The Night of My Conception. It was spring. The war was over. It was spring. On the horizon, mountain snow, virgin white in the lengthening days. It was spring. Flowers opening their petals, drops of dew wetting them, inviting in a bee, a butterfly, the curved, hard beak of a hummingbird. Perhaps they had been dancing at a wedding like we were the night we conceived our first son, the foreplay of bodies, sweat, and heat. They were young, still glad of one another, glad to be alive, the war done, straining for a life in a rush to remake the world, fill it with success and descendants. And so I began, a late May pleasure in hope. May there be more. I was not the last, and heard them once as a teenager, started awake for my own dream, mother's tight cry, arcing through the wall. Thanks. Oh.
Thank you, Daniel. That was glorious. A glorious impromptu opening set. Got lots of clap thingies on the Zoom here. Angus says, what a pleasure to hear you again, Daniel.
Thanks.
Oh, that was great. Okay, so I'm really excited now to introduce our featured reader, Sarah Enns. And I have a thing here, yes. So Sarah Enns is a writer and editor based in Treaty 1 territory, also known as Winnipeg, Manitoba. Her debut collection of poetry, The World is Mostly Sky, which I love that title, was shortlisted for the 2021 McNally Robinson Book of the Year Award and the 2022 Lansdowne Prize for Poetry. Her second book, Flyway, was launched in the spring of 2022, and we're going to hear her read from that tonight. And I dug up the little quotes from an interview called Quatrain Questions that Turnstone Press does about Flyway. I'm really interested. I don't write long poems. I write, like, if I top a page, I'm pretty proud of myself. So I was interested in what could possess somebody to to do this. Sarah said, I knew the form of Flyway would be a prairie long poem as soon as I began thinking about it. I wanted to write from a place of sustained attention, directed at this central idea of home, and deepen my perception of, and maybe challenge my relationship to, an overlooked place that I found captivating, the Manitoban tall grass prairie, and the villages constructed there by Mennonite settlers. I wanted to draw on a multiplicity of contradictory voices, including those of Ioma and her family, and destabilize some foundational narratives surrounding Mennonite exile and settlement, while also giving meaningful shape to the family memories I inherited. I needed a form that could handle Flyway's expansive, open-ended narrative, full of questions, characters, and fragmented letters in scripture, and found inspiration in the prairie long poem tradition. So I'm really excited to hear some of this long poem. Welcome, Sarah.
Right. How's that? Sounds that good? Okay. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Planet Earth Poetry for creating this space to celebrate and support and perform poetry. Thank you to Zoe for all your work. And thank you to Daniel. That was such a lovely surprise to hear your work. So thank you. I'm going to read a little bit from my first book too, just to kick things off. Just a few discrete, little poems before launching into the long thing. So this is from The World is Mostly Sky. It's a very different project from Flyway. Very interested in coming of age during a climate collapse. So this is a poem called Age Apocalypse. When I was 16, this boy wanted me to climb a silo on his farm, swing up metal rungs so we could see our whole town down there below. But I never did. And I never climbed the feed mill either. These my prairie strongholds, these skylines I thought would stay. I climbed instead the bell tower of that church in Piney, my friends and I scrambling the decaying steps stretched to steeple so we could see the fire we followed, its hum of smoke haunting some farmer's field or old forest. I don't know. And it was too far to touch us anyway, this slow-moving splinter, its brief opening, and us laughing, the way you do when it's always been the end of the world. This poem is called Orbit. After the funeral, we took off our shirts and sat backyard in our bras, thought to water the tomatoes, but instead drank Radlers, diagnosed each other astrologically, fell asleep with red shoulders, shocked the world could still reach us, shocked our skin still held sun. So that's The World is Mostly Sky. So he was saying Flyway is one long meditation, interested in home and migration and inherited family myths and stories. There are different sections in it, so some of them take place in the present day in the tallgrass prairie ecosystem, which is one of the most endangered landscapes in the world, and some of them take place from 1922 to 1950, 60 times, and it follows my Oma's journey from Ukraine during World War II and her eventual arrival, her displacement from that place and her eventual arrival into Manitoba. So I'm going to read sort of through the book chronologically, and I'll situate you as I kind of dip in and out of the poem. And I'll begin with the prelude. There is this place, this patch of tall grass, a grassland of blue stem wheatgrass, prairie cordgrass tall to my shoulders, hardy bunchgrass swaying. I'd never thought much about grass until I came to this place. But here the thought of grass is inescapable, everywhere in numerous thrones, dominions of grass bending. 6,000 square kilometers of tall grass once ran along the Red River Valley. Imagine. Less than 1% remains. What remains? This small place, this preserve here. It survives along a flyway, a flight path between breeding and wintering grounds, spanning continents and oceans, stringing together places like this. So the birds too I notice here, warblers, swallows, meadowlarks, migratory birds who rely on this place. My gaze tumbles from sky to shrub, poorly tracking flutters and specks and song. Not knowing, I hunch under clouds, blustery light falling into the grass. I am here to think about grass and birds, to ask and look and listen. I am here, a descendant of Mennonite settlers in the land of the Anishinaabe, Assiniboine, Dakota, and Cree, the homeland of the Métis. Mennonites, a people displacing. So goes the story carried from Switzerland, South Germany, Netherlands, Austria, Hungary, Poland, Prussia, Ukraine. Some stories follow you your whole life and spill out in front of you, flight paths well worn. Here we stayed, the Mennonites, converting tall grass to farmland and claiming it as home. Many voices burble under rising threat, overwhelming peril. They hum in the grass. And here I am, listening. And here I am, with this story. Tallgrass Psalmody, Part 1. What brings you to nest? Not wings, though the body's branches quiver. Some squall, some sense of service or sentry stirred you from city, so lift your head, look. And what do you bring to the nest? All knotted sorrow. How sorry you are, wishing to make peace in this breeding place, make stone and sedge from struggle. Do you know struggle? Watch here how earth spreads out like sea, cold wetland heaving. This ground bends sudden under sky. Follow suit. I will try to tell the truth to the blood feather tangled in the reeds. I don't know what I thought would happen when I came to this last stand of tall grass, holding field guides, family archives, and prayer stones in my hands. Am I close? Am I warm? I'm sitting here in dirt. So these tallgrass psalmody sections sort of weave in and out throughout the poem, and those are set in the present day in this specific preserve of what's left of the tallgrass prairie landscape. And so I'm going to jump now to the section called Flight, which takes place from 1929 to 1945, and it picks up with my Oma's story, and it's in the first person from her perspective. Her name is Ani. Kronstal, Soviet Ukraine. The first Lydia came loud and red, fists and feet. Mother hurt my wrist squeezing, her skirt hitched to hips, until the midwife caught the slipping baby, pronounced her girl, sister, everything I'd been hoping. Then Lydia's body filled with lead. The eldest at 6, my job became strapping her to a narrow wooden board, careful to mind her lolling. I practiced Russian or sang her the old songs, while Hans, only 4, rubbed her hair, her bright, wet mouth. He cried when she moaned, so I kept her from him, never left her on the floor, felt her eyes sweep the flesh of my face. The first Lydia lived 2 years and died before the killing hunger. That year, Peter came, our little boy in blue. Spring, everything mud. The minister helped Mother move Lydia board to box, Father upright in the grave. The minister prayed in our language, and my shoulders ached with the memory of her weight, and I do not remember release, only that the second Lydia rolled, sat up, held my fingers. When I rocked her, I cooed, Lida, and that year, our churches closed. Mother often cried behind the house. Hunger taught us to wake slowly, to lift as if from water. If you did not starve, hunger taught you to watch and wait. If you did not starve, the stone of your stomach turned traitor. Father was waiting, but I do not know who pointed the police at him. I know Mother screamed once. I thought I saw them shoot him in the head. I didn't hear anything. I saw my father on his knees, Father's anger, a storm I knew, kneeling. He took with him the Bible from the kitchen table, and Mother ran to the neighbors to borrow money, told me, Ani, stay. So from the door, I watched my father walk the road to the Black Raven full of men. He did not look up at the night. Mother pressed her face into his hands. Lida, from her cradle, howling. In the kitchen, Mother stood, bent over the stove, and shook. I got sick, and the village emptied of men. The black raven ate them all. Osterwich, Soviet Ukraine. A blur of hands and skirts and curls. Did I laugh? It spun from me like smoke, hot and full. If I laughed, I ached with it. Look, these Soviet boys jumping, legs wide, stomping to ground, quick as drums. Could you hear it to the moon, their far-flung feet? And me, soon off to Simferopol, my scholarship spinning me somewhere new, into something immense, endless. I could reach up, catch my dress, stamp the world solid, turn and turn and turn. We must have laughed, we trembled with it. The storm we knew, kneeling. The party broke at 6 a.m. We were so proud you could hear it to the moon. In the buggy that took me home, I held my cheeks puffed to my palms, pulled in all the air I could, this blur of leaping and loud in the landing. I almost laughed the next day, to have danced, to have ever danced, when the next day the Germans invaded. I'm going to read one more piece from this section towards the end of this narrative. This is after her brother Hans has been conscripted into the German army, and her younger brother Peter has also died. So now it's just Ani, her mother, and her little sister Lida. Mountainside, Lower Styria, occupied Yugoslavia. Dirty rags, a gold-painted picture frame, glass smashed, a spoon, someone's doll, her hair in braids, songbook, recipes, encyclopedia of births, and us, told to settle, Lida too old to hold mother's skirt like this, with such hard fists. Our Oma, aunts, cousins, sent to some different hill in the distant range, there, out the window left open. And what were we to do? We were who we were. We stood together, cried, and then we set to work. So eventually, those three, my Oma, her mother, her little sister, do make it to the British zone, and they immigrate to Canada in 1948. So that's the next section. It's called Unsettling, that I'll read from. It has a little epigraph in Low German, which is the Mennonite language, which my version of my accent is not very good, but here we go. Aller Anfang ist Shoah, which means all beginnings are hard. The humble hands of Christ prepare the table, knead, hold, flood fields from the pulpit. The story goes, Ani sat herself on the corner of his dark, heavy desk, watched him grade papers in fine red pen. The story goes, she plucked a piece of candy from a small glass bowl, twirled a hard, sweet circle from plastic, crinkling. The story goes, she learned to know Gerhard, the stern, shy, school teacher preacher, the village's most eligible bachelor. Born eldest son of Gerhard G.H. Entz, born then moved in 1923 along with 20,000 other Russlander Mennonites to further settle Canadian Prairie. The Canadian Mennonite Board of Colonization, immigrant founded by an earlier wave of fleeing farming Mennonites to coordinate this coming of Christ followers, to tell the martyred legacy, war, revolution, war, hunger, exile, an inheritance of turning to earth, resisting the world, learning to lean your body from flesh through ice, to carry your enemy safe to shore, this shore of rich soil, shored up and tilled under, a promised, wind-blown, emptied land, to cultivate with conviction, though enemies everywhere, so safeguard the spirit and forego despair, the sparrow there, see and know the Lord watching, cover your hair. She misses dancing. She misses almost nothing but the dancing. In thawing dirt, a crocus and a child on her hands and knees shrieks full to the earth, purple. In just a few hot months, the beets will need digging, the beans will need picking, the church aching and sweating. It's either quiet or not at all quiet. Head first like a nuthatch, follow the flash pattern of the field. Watch the conscience of a practical people, a people persecuted, set apart, saved, reborn safe in parceled prairie, prairie set apart, stolen for settler hands, driving plowshares deep into ancestral grounds. The teachings of Christ. Do not adorn your flesh, do not take up arms, do not swear an oath. Avoid the country fair, their tractor shows, no card games or drink or smoke or sex. So cling to the anguish of the faith stories. Remember with holy severity, this is God's own truth. This is a crowbar. This is your salvation. And I'll end the reading by just, there's one last Tallgrass Psalmody section at the end, so I'll read through that bit. What story are you telling? Whose? I will try to tell the truth, I say, crouching to pluck the broken blood feather from its slimy net of reeds. Look how skin like wax sheaths the hollow quill. Lift your head and look. Will you join the chorus? An ongoing trill follows the fringe of bur oak and black ash, stirs up the overcast. Oh, downtrodden stray, scrambling for purchase on a soft bridge of song, this journey winds through you as guide. Once, I held out my hand and a nuthatch picked a peanut from my palm, its feet both sharp and light, its body fleeting and full, and I think, if nothing else, I can hold myself still enough to brush, even briefly, against this presence, airborne and tipping my whole face to the rain. After many minutes listening, savanna sparrow, clay-colored sparrow, red-winged blackbird, brown-headed cowbird, western meadowlark, mourning dove, birds, like poems, follow the river. Will you look well, dwell with, attend? Above aspen and maple, sage and aster, you may glean a landscape inherited. Approach unknowing and singing praise. In my Oma's margins, how do you remember home? Have you recalled your flock? The horizon shimmers oil rainbows and weather worsens. Gauge the groundwater you sent away industriously. Measure the severity of the next prolonged drought. Now, make a racket. 1/3 of migratory grassland birds are nearing extinction, I read. Read again. Write down. A crow watching from the hydro pole along the highway tilts its head, extends its throat. How did you come to this? Every attempt to return trace tributaries to some source becomes another rough meeting of self. So return again, restless with loss, desire, never hollowed or whole. Here is still something of home. Bending, I smear blood from my legs, cut by grass hip high, muggy buzzing in my ears, intimate and ancient, and latching sharp tongues to my skin. And how will you go from here? This place where, spreading these cloths in the cold river, in the rustling grass, under the reaching tree, I take note. Thank you.